Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy September 14th, and good afternoon to you all. Today, we're going to be talking about some exciting new methodologies in the field of digital humanities called text analysis. My name is Matt Hanna. I'm an assistant professor of digital humanities at the Purdue University Libraries and School of Information Studies, and I'm very happy to share with you some of the basics of working with text analysis. This session is going to be divided into two parts. The first half of the session, I'm going to give you some of the very basics of text analysis, and this is a very complicated and interesting area of study. And so I'm just going to give you a sketch of some of the major challenges and issues facing researchers who want to work with text analysis. And then the second part of the session, for those of you who are perhaps a bit daring, there will be a hands-on tutorial where you can play along and do some basic text analysis if you want to. And so this is going to have a bit of a tutorial hands-on element to it as well. So let's get started. Text analysis has become a methodology used by digital humanities because of the increasing availability of electronic books or digital books really over the past 30 years or so. So beginning in the 1990s, there were many initiatives that began to think about ways to digitize books and make them available online freely for anyone who wants to look at them. And because of these initiatives, we now have access to millions and millions of books and other texts, such as magazines, pamphlets, and other things. And we've begun to think about ways to use text analysis to look at these books. And so some of these available repositories online for you to think about are things like the Internet Archive, which now has around 20 million books digitized and made freely available to researchers. Project Gutenberg, which we'll return to at the end of the session, now has around 60,000 books available, including the plain text versions of these books. And don't worry if you don't know what plain text is. By the end of the session, you'll be very familiar with it. The HathiTrust Digital Library, which Purdue University has a specific relationship with, has around 14 million books available. And of course, the most famous Google Books now has 25 million volumes available for folks who want to do some research. And as we think about text analysis in computational methodologies, I wanted to show you one specific tool that Google has developed, which enables these kinds of research projects to develop. And this is called the Ngram Viewer. And the Ngram Viewer is essentially a tool that Google Books designed so you can explore the Google Books archive of those 20 million volumes. And you can see here, if you want to play with this yourself, you can just Google Ngram Viewer and you should find it right away. And what you can do is type search terms into Google like you would a normal search. And it will provide you with this chart showing the appearance of that word or concept across the entire Google Books collection. And they've provided a nice timeline here of the publication dates for those volumes. And so here I'm doing a basic search in English for 3 different concepts: psychology, sociology, and anthropology, in an effort to maybe understand better how these disciplines were discussed in the book collection. But you can add anything into the search bar and do a search over time in the Google Books corpus. And so what we see here is that digitizing all of these available documents has enabled us to create new tools and methods for exploring, analyzing, or visualizing data about those books. And this is called text analysis. Text analysis can be called many things, and there's no real set terminology for this. I've heard it called text mining, computational text analysis, computational literary analysis, but basically the idea is the same. Text analysis, for our purposes, will be the application of computational methodologies to quantify and analyze patterns in a corpus or across multiple corpora. And corpora is plural for corpus. And this is a key vocabulary in text analysis. The corpus or corpora comes from the Latin meaning body. And really, when we use the word corpus in text analysis, what we're referring to is a body of texts, a collection of documents. And this will make more sense when we get into the hands-on section, where you'll actually have the opportunity to explore a corpus. Text analysis has many, many steps in an actual project. This is what we might think of as the life cycle of a text analysis project. And each step is very important for building the corpus, creating a corpus of text that you can analyze with your computer. And it's not just as simple as plugging in a search in Google. And you can see there are roughly 8 steps, although we might imagine others as well. First, you're defining the problem you're investigating. You're thinking about what kinds of text analysis tools you might need, thinking about your approach. Then you're finding the data that you're interested. So for us, this might mean identifying a source for various texts that we might be interested in analyzing. Where will we find these texts? Then we need to find a way to standardize those texts so that they are all in the same format and in the same basic structure for our computer to read. In step 5, we process them using our computer. We might extract some features from this, such as most frequently used words, for example, or recurring phrases that happen across all of the texts. In step 7, we might analyze those features and maybe come to some conclusions about the frequency of certain word usages or the ways that different phrases reappear. And then finally, in step 8, we will come up with some analysis of that and some discussion of our project. And so this is a really nice resource for thinking about this. It comes from this article here. But I really think, even though they're talking about text mining, it does apply to the work that we're going to be doing today. And it's a really nice reminder that any project is going to go through this kind of research process. Some considerations when you want to begin a text analysis project. And there are many others as well, but these are some of the basic ones that will come up if you decide to do your own text analysis project. 1, digital copies of texts are only legally available in the public domain. And public domain is a word we use to describe documents that have come out of copyright and are now freely available to share online. In the United States, public domain is any document that was published before 1924. And so this is a challenge if you wanted to do, say, a text analysis project on contemporary literature. You'd only be able to work on documents before 1924. Now, there are some ways around this. The HathiTrust Digital Library has done a great job of finding ways to enable text analysis projects on documents that are still in copyright. And they do this through a process whereby you can't actually share or read the documents. You can only do text analysis operations on them. But it is a significant challenge for scholars who are interested in more contemporary materials. Not to get off on a tangent, but one of the challenges when you're doing text analysis is that you can often find digital copies of things that were illegally produced and shared. And so there are versions of things out there that are not supposed to be out there, but technically you're only allowed to legally share documents published before 1924. The other challenge, as you'll see, is access to what are called plain text files or some other machine readable format. As I'll show you in a moment, it's not just as simple as finding a document and then performing a text analysis project on it. There are actually substantial steps that you must go through before that will work. One of these is finding a way to translate a PDF into a plain text document. Text analysis has several considerations for thinking about, make sure I'm not muted here. Okay, for thinking about text analysis projects and some of the challenges of dealing with text analysis in an actual project. So for example, digital copies are only legally available in the public domain before 1924 in the US as of 2020. And every year this changes. And there's actually several places online where they'll have big release parties for new documents that come into the public domain. But what that means is if you're a researcher, it's hard for you to get access to documents that existed after 1924. And there are some possibilities for how to do this. For example, the HathiTrust Digital Library now makes available sort of non-consumptive copies of text that you can do analysis on, but you cannot share or access these texts unless, at least legally. Some of the other challenges include access to plain text or some other format that's easily readable by a computer. And we'll talk more about this in a moment, but plain text files are often hard to get, or if you can get them, you need to make sure that they're appropriate for your project. And one of the reasons for this is that PDF files, you might have heard of PDFs, are actually considered an image file. And so they're not machine readable. In fact, PDFs are easily human readable, i.e. we can look at a PDF of a document or an article or whatever it might be, or a book, and we can read that ourselves. But computers are not as good at reading things, and they need them encoded in certain ways. And because PDFs are image files, we have to translate them into some kind of plain text format. And I'll show you in a moment what that looks like. But there's an entire process of text analysis that goes into translating PDF image files into plain text documents so that they can be analyzed. And when we do that, we end up with what's called messiness. You might have heard of this. Sometimes data can be messy or dirty. And what this means is that when we translate a PDF image into a plain text, we use software to do that. And often that can be imperfect. And I'm going to show you a messy text in a moment, but it will affect the text analysis project. And then finally, one of the big challenges is getting a comprehensive enough corpus of texts. I mentioned a moment ago that corpus comes from the Latin for body. We want a body of text that will represent the area of study that we're interested in. And then alongside some of those challenges comes encoding issues for many languages, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. So for example, if we were going to put together a corpus of 19th century British novels that we were going to analyze, and we wanted to do this because putting together this corpus would allow us to make some claims about 19th century British literature, we would find that there would be some challenges. For example, we know from catalogs and other documents that there were probably 20 to 30,000 novels published in the 19th century in Britain. And of those, only 6,000 are still available around, because they were preserved in archives or were in people's collections. So that's a substantial number of documents that are missing. And of the 6,000 that we know are still available, still survived, only 3,500 really are available in full text, meaning that they're available for us to do computational work with them. And so this is a substantial reduction in the total number of documents that are available to us. And if we were to do a project on 19th century British novels, we would have to think about that, and we would have to consider what's missing from the corpus and the politics of what was preserved and what was lost. So for example, if we're going to talk about messiness, and I want to return to that, say we're going to do this project on 19th century British literature, and we have a PDF of Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. If we were going to translate Dracula from a PDF into a plain text, we might encounter what's called some messiness. Now, the process of translating a PDF, as you can see on the left side of the screen here, into a plain text, which you can see on the right side of the screen, is called OCR, or Optical Character Recognition. And what this means is that the computer will have a software program that will look at the PDF, the image file, and it will try to see where are words by looking for spaces. So it's going to look and see, here's a space, here's a space. And it's going to try to see if these are letters using a dictionary that it has. And it will start to translate these into plain text on the right. And so you can see that plain text is stripped down. There's not a lot of formatting here. And you can see that it's also imperfect. So in this process of OCR translation, you might start to notice some errors. So just take a moment and see how many you can find in the plain text version on your right. What errors do you see? Well, you might have noticed that the apostrophe in Jonathan Harker's journal, here it is, was translated into a star. So the computer saw this and it said, I'm not sure what that is. I think it's a star. You can also see here that Bistritz, the computer had a hard time identifying this last character, and in the program it translated as to Bistrit 2. Here we see a really problematic area. Specifically, it identified this string of numbers and letters into a sequence of characters that are sort of oddly placed. And then finally, you'll notice at the end here, there was some errors as well, where there may have been a mark on the paper that the computer saw and tried to identify as a letter, and in fact, added these characters in. And so one of the things you see when you're doing text analysis project, yeah, Skylar saw it, is that even marks on the paper can get interpreted as letters, and letters and numbers can get interpreted as other characters. And so this presents a problem. If I was doing a text analysis project on Dracula, I'd have to go through and look for these errors and see if those errors were impeding my interpretation. Because the computer, it turns out, is very bad at reading. It's only going to look for what it sees. And so messiness is a challenge that we have to deal with when doing text analysis. Another significant challenge in doing text analysis is what's called pre-processing. And I'm going to talk about this in a moment. But basically, when we look at characters on a computer screen, when we look at letters, say, or numbers, what we don't see is the encoding that goes behind the letters. And the encoding is what the computer reads. And so you can see here, capital A, if I'm looking at the encoding schema UTF-8, and there are many others, but this is the one I'm looking at today. You can see that in UTF-8, the letter capital A is 0041, and small a is 0061. And so if you're looking at words that have capital letters, you have to remember that capital A is not the same as small a, even though to the human reader, they're the same. Similarly, the letter B. Capital B is 0042, lowercase b is 0062. Again, B will not necessarily equal B to a computer. Why does this matter? It's not just that we're playing Sesame Street, But actually, it turns out that when we look at sequences of letters strung together as words, and we ask a computer to identify them, it's going to look at a sequence of these encodings to identify the letter strings. And when we ask a computer to do some analysis, it's going to look through a document and it's going to look for spaces to try to identify words. And if it sees, say, the word red, it's going to attach this encoding to it. But say we had a comma after that word and then a space, or a period and then a space. In that case, the computer is going to read RED comma as the word, and it's going to give us this encoding. You can see that 002C is the encoding for comma, and 002E is the encoding for period. What that means is if I ask the computer, I want to count of all the times the word red appears, what I'll get is 3 different counts of 1 in this instance. Because the red does not equal red with a comma, does not equal red with a period. And so when we're working with text analysis, one thing we must keep in mind is these encodings. And one way to deal with that is to reduce textual variation. That is to say, if I want to do a text analysis project and I want to get accurate numbers, say for frequently used words, I'm going to have to do some work beforehand to make sure that there aren't any capital letters, there's no punctuation, that any variations are reduced. So that means getting rid of suffixes. And that way I can actually begin to reduce the variation enough that I might get accurate counts for my analysis. And that's a whole process that in text analysis we call pre-processing. The other significant challenge with language encoding, as I just talked about, this is for English language. But when we're dealing with other languages, we often will find that there are unique challenges for OCR. For example, many modern languages don't have dictionaries for OCR, so they're impossible to translate using software. And so we might think of languages like Thai, for example, or maybe Russian. Now, those languages are developing OCR dictionaries, and many of them probably already have them, but it is a significant challenge. And there's an entire section of digital humanities that just talks about multilingual projects, developing new platforms and new dictionaries so that we can do translations of, say, languages that may be underrepresented and actually do some of the work. Ancient languages are also challenging. Certainly things like Latin are probably okay, but if you're working in, say, Hebrew, you're going to have to work very hard to find text encoding dictionaries to translate, say, into a plain text file. And lacking OCR diminishes the scope of possible text analysis projects, and that's a significant problem for scholars who work in this area, and we need to expand the number of possibilities. So there's much work to be done in multilingual OCR, and I'm very excited about the work that's already happening in this area. Folks calling for more projects and more research. Okay. Now we're going to switch over to the hands-on portion of the process. So we're going to actually play with a wonderful tool for doing some text analysis. This is called Voyant Tools, and it's a great resource for anyone who wants to do a text analysis project. Voyant Tools is wonderful for helping you explore text analysis as a newcomer, but even if you're a seasoned researcher, it's a wonderful resource for folks who want to get into doing text analysis and develop a project. Now you can either follow along. I'll take you through a tutorial of how to use Voyant Tools, or you can just follow and watch me. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to navigate to a web address voyant/tools.org. And you can see this is what it should look like. This tool, just to give credit where credit is due, was designed by Stefan Sinclair and Jeffrey Rockwell. And it's one of my favorite digital humanities tools to work with. At the end of the session, I'm going to show you how to incorporate your own text into Voyant Tools. But for the beginning, we're just going to play with some of the corpora that are already available in the platform. So if you see down here at the bottom, it will say you can select an existing corpus or we can upload one. So we're going to go ahead and click open. And we're going to have a drop-down menu here to select. And we can either do Shakespeare's plays or the novels of Jane Austen. Now you're already probably getting a sense for the power of computational text analysis. For example, if you were to read all of Shakespeare's plays, that might take you several months, maybe even years, or Jane Austen's novels. But with text analysis, we can do all of this very quickly. So I'm going to choose Jane Austen's novels, and then I'm going to click open. And what you will see when I open Jane Austen's corpus is this is all of Jane Austen's novels. There are 8 documents in this collection with 781,763 words total, 15,368 of which are unique. Now, what's really great about this research tool is that I can quickly begin to get some statistical information about these novels using Voyant tools. And you can see I have different visualization panels and different options here. And each of these is draggable by just hovering on the edge and waiting for the arrows to appear and then moving, clicking and moving the window. So I can make this bigger or smaller. We can also click up here in the blue banner. And if I click the window here, I can actually just make an entire screen of one of these visualizations. So I'm going to click on summary here, just so you'll be able to see it a little easier. So this is kind of the sense of what text analysis is all about. So for example, I can look at document length. I can look at which novels are longer or shorter, which have the most words. I can look at vocabulary density. That is the number of unique words as a ratio of the total number of words. And it's kind of interesting to note that some of her earlier works have a higher vocabulary density and some of her later works don't. But then a few of these also fit in. And you can see they give us a little score of that ratio of unique words to total words. Oh, let me see here. Sorry, thank you for checking that. It's supposed to do it, but it may not have. So let me share this. How's that, Skylar? Looks like, Skylar, you're the only one here, so I'll just, you and I will tinker with this tool. Let me go back. Can you see this screen? Sorry, I closed the chat. Yes, okay. So if you go to this screen and then you click open, you can choose your corpus, Skylar, and you can either pick Austen's novels or Shakespeare's plays. And then you just click open. And here's where you can basically see all the visualizations on one screen. And so we're in the summary here, and I'm just going to open it up here in the blue banner. You can actually open different visualizations as a full screen option. So I'm going to do that. So the summary is really useful for giving us a sense of the various options and the various things you can do with text analysis. For example, you'll see that Voyant has given me the most frequently used words across the entire corpus. And it's very interesting. It's Mr. 3,117, Mrs., Miss, and said, and think. And that's really interesting because now I can begin to think about this entire set of novels through the particular words that are used. And I can actually increase the number, so I can make it 20 by just dragging this slider. Sorry, I see chat popping up here. Yeah, pretty cool. And we get a really good sense. And then, of course, Voyant will also give us the distinctive words for each novel as well. And one of the things that always has stood out to me when working with Jane Austen's novels is how often those are characters. So. If I go back to this window at the top, and I go to Corpus Tools, I want to show you the Cirrus view because this is a really common visualization and it's a really cool way of thinking about a text, or as Voyant Tools calls it, seeing through your text. This is called the Cirrus cloud. And what it does is Voyant basically counts the words across all of these novels and then gives me a visualization of the most frequently used words, here seen as a cloud. And if I hover on each one of these, I can see how many times that word was used across all of the novels. And so it's a really cool resource for quickly seeing what are the major topics within my data set or my corpus. And again, I guess it's not surprising given it's Jane Austen, but look at how many of these words are related to titles and nobility. And so we think of things like Sir, Mr. All of these are titles. Lady, thinking about how Jane Austen's novels are often about polite society in Great Britain. And so we begin to see some of the concerns of this text as we explore it. But say we didn't like the way that these words appeared, or say, you know, one of the things that Voyant does for us almost immediately is it takes out a lot of those little words like a, an, and the. Those are called stop words. And stop words are the words that we might want to get rid of because we actually want to see things like words related to gender or relationships. Well, how do we do that in Voyant? Well, it's actually really easy. If you click at the top here on the little switch, you'll see that Voyant has already included a stop words list for us. And look at the number of languages that this tool will actually use. So they have stop word lists provided already for so many different languages, including Arabic, Chinese, Hungarian. So many different languages have a stop word list, or a list of those little words that we may not want to look at, like a, an, and the. But say we wanted to say, take out some of the words that are already in there. Well, you can click on Edit List. And you just edit and click enter to add a new line. And then you decide what words you're not interested in and you want to remove. So let's take out said, because we're not really that interested in that word said. And now I have a new stop word list with said added. And if I click confirm, it will take out said and reshuffle the visualization. So when you start working in Voyant Tools, you can quickly analyze the text, and you can actually filter out some of the noise that you may not be interested in. Well, that's really cool. We get to see some of those big words and we get to analyze some of the frequent concepts. But what if we could look at a word over time? Well, we can do that. So let's go back up here and click on our window. And we're going to go to Corpus Tools. And we're going to go all the way down here to Trends. And trends will basically visualize a novel as a spatial relationship. And we can actually analyze words over the course of a text. So for example, let's see here. We can select a word. Say I'm interested in temporality and I click time. It'll actually show me the frequency of time over the entire corpus. And you can change the way this appears, so it could be columns or area. And you can actually do some analysis of the way that a word appears over the entire corpus. And maybe that would lead you to a future research project of some kind. And let's say we want to add another word. Let's look at love. So you can actually track words as concepts alongside other words. And if I go back to the main window here, and if you want to go back to the main window, all you have to do is click on this window again and click Corpus View. It turns out you can actually click on a word in the word cloud and it will do the same thing for you. And that's a really nice resource. So Trends is a really great tool for thinking about how a word might appear over the course of a document or several. Another way to do trends, I'm going to go back up here to my blue banner and I'm going to click the window, is a little tool called Bubble Lines. And this one's really fun for analyzing text over the course of a document or set of documents. And you can see that here we have our most frequently used words up in the top left corner, and they visualize over the course of a document, in this case, love and friendship or Lady Susan. And so this is a really nice way of tracking the same kind of thing, tracking a trend. And if we check this box, separate lines for items, for terms, it'll actually divide these up so you can actually begin to do a cross section of each text and look at the particular words and concepts. Look at that. The frequently used words are much less frequent in Lady Susan than when we get to the later novels, Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park. And so maybe we might think about, is there a research project analyzing the use of titles such as Mr., Mrs., and Miss in Austen's corpus? Why is it that in 1811 she begins to use them so frequently? Again, we can change our search here, and we can add terms that we want to look at. I should have reset that. And we can begin to see and track concepts, which is really, really useful if you have a sequence of novels or documents or reports, and you can really put a lot of things into Voyant Tools and do this kind of great comparative text analysis work very easily. And you can also decide which ones you want to look at if you want to just look at one novel. By selecting documents and then unclicking all of these, I can actually choose to only look at one text. Let's look at something else now. This is another text analysis tool called collocates. Collocates are basically words that appear next to other words frequently. So just like we can analyze one word in a corpus, we can also analyze word pairs. For example, when we do a collocate table, we can see that Mr. gets paired with nightly 320 times. And some of these are less interesting, such as, Mr. and Mrs., but maybe it's good-humored gets referenced a lot. So you can really begin to see how little time gets mentioned a lot. You can begin to see how text analysis allows us to do some work with tracking these kinds of pairs. And what's really great about Voyant Tools is that we can actually go into our corpus tools here, and we can create, let's see, where is this? It's in Visualization Tools. It's called links. And it's essentially a collocate network showing the most frequently used terms that are linked to other terms. So again, this is a really nice resource for thinking about the way that language works in a document or set of documents, and then visualizing that information very quickly. You can zoom in and out by just rolling your mouse wheel, and you can drag things by clicking and moving them. And if you want to, you can even take things out by just dragging them off the screen. It's a very, very interesting visualization. Okay. It looks like we're about out of time. So I wanted to end by just showing you quickly how to do this with your own text. So what you can do, if we go back to the very beginning, so this is the very beginning here. So what you can do is you can either paste in your text here if you had a full text of a document, and Voyant will actually take Word documents as well. So that's good to know. Or you can click upload and then find your document and upload it that way. Or, and this is really cool, if you go to Project Gutenberg, and I mentioned this earlier, Project Gutenberg is a great place to find plain text files of all kinds of literature and various kinds of magazines and books and things like that. So if I search in Project Gutenberg and I say, give me the novel Dracula, I can actually click on this, and you'll see that Gutenberg has provided a plain text version of the novel Dracula. And I can actually copy this web address and I can drop it in here. And I could do a text analysis of Dracula. Isn't that cool? So there are many ways to put your own text into Voyant. It's very easy to do. You can either upload them, you can paste them, or you can connect a link from somewhere like Project Gutenberg where the documents are. And you can then begin to do your own analysis. I'll just show you one more thing before we conclude. Say you've added a text. I've added Dracula, and I think to myself, this is going to be a great research project, but I really wish I could add some more Gothic novels. What if I wanted to add Frankenstein? Well, if I click on documents here, I can see each document in my corpus. And if I click on more, and I click on add, I get this window again. Now I can go back to Gutenberg or wherever I might have this, and I could say, I want Frankenstein. And I'm going to just add that in here, or upload it, or paste it. I can now do an analysis of, say, Dracula and Frankenstein next to each other. And so you can begin to do really interesting kinds of analysis using these different visualizations. Now, I've only shown you a tiny portion of what's available in Voyant Tools. So as we conclude for today, I would say go explore, have fun. And if you like a visualization you've created and you want to keep it, you can always export it by clicking on the little arrow at the top. And you can actually export it as a picture and save it for later to put in your publication or into your project or your research or whatever it is. So I hope you enjoyed this session on Voyant Tools. Again, I apologize for the nastiness and unpleasantness of the trolls, but I hope that you found this useful and found some possible future research projects with text analysis. Thank you.